Tracy Powell, Tanya Raby,
Here.
Sonia Del Rio, Kirby Scott Caldwell,
Here.
Danielle Stanley, Emmanuel Garcia, Ryan Parnell,
Here.
Aiden Keefe.
Here.
Chairperson Raby, you do have a quorum.
Wonderful.
Recording in progress.
Alrighty, so our first item on the agenda is the public comments. Are there any requests for public comments today?
There are no public comments for today.
Okay, all right, next, the minutes from the Citizens Advisory Board held on March 7th, distributed to the members of the CAB prior to this meeting for review. May I have a motion to approve the minute?
A motion first.
Second.
It's been moved by Peter Henderson and seconded by Robert Castaneda that the minutes from March 7th, 2024 be approved as submitted. We'll take a roll call vote. Scott
It's okay. Yeah.
Vanderwill,
Yes.
Caroline Pavlovic,
Yes.
Ryan McCray,
Yes.
Ryan Parnell,
Yes.
Rob Johnson,
Yes.
Tanya Raby.
Yes.
Peter Henderson.
Yes.
Robert Castaneda.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Awesome. So we have two CTA staff presentations today. Very excited to hear these. The first one is entitled Mobility, Equity and Economic Impact of Transit in the Chicago Region. And our Chief Administrative Officer, Tom McCone, will introduce our presenters and provide more context. Good morning.
Great, good morning, Chair, members of the board. In a second, while I load up the presentation here. As you noted, I'm Tom McCone, Chief Administrative Officer. I lead our partnership with MIT, and what I'm introducing today is actually a joint partnership project between MIT and the Argonne National Laboratory, looking at the topic of mobility, equity, and economic impact of transit in the Chicago region. We're particularly happy to be able to bring the results of this project to this board and to make them available and more broadly public in terms of the impact that transit and public transit has across our region. The presentation today is going to be given by Aymeric Rousseau, who is the Director of Vehicle and Mobility Systems at Argonne National Labs. And then also joining us remotely is Jim Aloisi, who's the Director of the Transit Research Consortium at MIT. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them to conduct the presentation. There'll be time at the end for questions and answers, obviously. So we'll be covering a number of topics in the presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Aymeric Rousseau. I first wanted to thank everybody who's been involved in the study, including Argonne and MIT, but more especially a lot of the technical supports and data and guidance from CTA. So when we are looking at transit, we all know it is the backbone of urban travel, despite its small modal share. One of the challenge in the last several years is a significantly drop in ridership, about 30%. That led, is also about 40% drop in mode share. So what we've been looking at is, what would happen in a scenario in Chicago and Chicago metropolitan area where there is no transit at all, right? So the first scenario is we're looking at a baseline, 2025, where CTA recovers from fall 2019 levels and all other agencies to today's level. Now, what we've done is thinking about a scenario, as I mentioned, where the entire transit service is removed. But not just that, and because there is no train, no bus, no transit, then it means people will have to buy more cars, right? You still have to go to work, you still have to do some things. So looking at the current car ownership throughout Chicago, we increased it to about 30%. So that means the household with no car by one, and the households with one car by another. So the way we did that, over the last 15 years, we've developed a transportation system model that represents every single person, every single car, every single truck, traffic lights, stop signs, roads, buildings around Chicago metropolitan area. So we are doing very detailed, in-depth representation of people and goods movement over a 24-hour period. So we know using CTA data, who's using the train, the bus, where, how often, and that is really what our foundation was. So we'll start with some takeaways. Site transit is critical to mobility, economy, and equity. And usually there's lots of discussion around coffee, and it's like, yep, everybody knows that, but there is no numbers behind it, right? How critical is that? What happens? So at the city level, we estimate that there will be a decrease in vehicle speed by about 33%, and resulting in an increase in travel time by 35%. So if it takes an hour for someone to go to work right now, it'll take an hour and 20 minutes. What this means is because everything is a lot more congested and it takes longer to go from place A to B, there's a lot of daily activities that are canceled, about 2 million per day in the region, right? You have to go to work, but now, maybe you don't go to restaurants or you don't go shopping because it's going to take you another significant amount of time. So I mentioned that we model everything and everyone in Chicago Metro. We also have a lot of detail on each individual person in the households, gender, race, income, so on and so forth. So that allows us to understand who will this impact. And a lot of the activity cancellation in the city this time, about a quarter of them are focusing on impacting the lowest 20% income. More than half are impacting women. There is a disproportionate impact on the lowest income community as well as women. So people are traveling less. And what this means is that there is a direct economic activity impact at the region. We estimate that on an annual basis, $35 billion will be lost at the region. So this is related to the fact that people will spend a lot more time in their car moving. So that's a loss of productivity. Also, the fact that there is a lot of costs related to buying cars, not cheap. And the fact that there is a lot of trips, restaurants, so on and so forth. When we are looking at the overall return on investments, APTA at the national has been saying it's about a 4x, right? For every dollar, you get $4. When we are looking at Chicago, there is a much, much higher density. So we actually estimate that it's a 13x. And this is only looking at direct impact. So for the next couple of slides, I'll dig a little bit more into some of these details. So looking first at the impact on average speed and average travel time, at the region level, it is about a 14 to 15% decrease in average speed and increase in travel time. If you're looking at the city, you can about double it, right? So anybody living downtown, will be most impacted. But the key here is that everybody will be impacted, whether they used to take transit or not, right? Transit does not just support transit riders, it actually supports all the car drivers because, they can more easily go to their final destination. So what does it mean in terms of activities? Again, starting at the region, about 12% of non-work activities, right? Again, you have to go to work. That is not an option. That's why if there is no transit, you're going to have to buy a car. But about 12% of non-road activities get canceled. And similarly, almost you can multiply by 2 within the city, about 1 in 4 non-work activities in the city get canceled, right? That means, again, it's not just restaurants or shopping that drives economy, but it's also hospitals. It's also a lot of things that people have to do that say, I'll go to the dentist later. I'll push it later. I don't have time. I just came back, right? So who are these cancellation affecting? More than half are affecting women. And if you're looking at the lowest 40% income group, again, it's less than half. About half of all the cancellation affect the lowest 40% income groups. So thinking again, right, this is as also long-term will have impact on health as well as other. Now, where are those cancellations located? We've said it affects minorities, underserved communities. So without a surprise, it mostly will affect residents and businesses on the south and west side. So that means that the cancellation by activity location, right, they threaten businesses and institutions in those communities. Taking all of this together and looking at the regional economic impact on an annual basis, it's about $35 billion. And this is really coming out of three main buckets. The first one is activity cancellation. Restaurants, shopping, sales, and about $4.6 billion, about $10 billion in travel time losses. So this is assuming $1,000 per hour average income throughout the city. And then a 20 billion annual car ownership increase. And that's assuming the average in the US car ownership is $10,000 per year, right? So if you add that to, you have about 35 billion. That is where we got the 1 in 13, right? That's where we got our 13x ratio. Now, this is a partial analysis, and it actually is only considering direct impact. We didn't consider a ripple effect on job losses, business closure, cost of living increases. We did not take into account public health costs, right? A lot of these activities, again, are where, going to hospitals and dentists and so on and so forth. So again, it's kind of doomsday to a certain extent, right? Where the overall region will be very, very much congested. Because of that, people will travel less. Because of that, it will cost a lot of money, whether it is on travel time, whether it is on the businesses throughout the region. And with that, I will hand it out to Jim, who will dig into more detail on some of the analysis.
Thank you, Amrik. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. One of the things we try to do in this report, in addition to looking at the economic impacts of having transit and the importance of a public transportation system to local and regional economies, so we wanted to drill down a little bit into how transit really has impacts directly on people. And we looked at this topic of the value of transit to individuals in a pretty new and fresh way. One of the first things we did, as you see here, is we looked at what we call mobility of care trips. Mobility of care trips are trips to school, trips to healthcare, helping an elderly parent get to a doctor or a hospital visit, grocery shopping, exactly the kinds of activities that represent a person's overall quality of life. These are not work trips. And in fact, in Chicago, what we found is there were more care trips taken in Chicago than trips to work. So it's an insight into how vital a role public transportation plays in determining someone's quality of life. And as you can see in this slide, care trips are heavily gendered. 60% of care trips are being made by women. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see similar charts regarding income status. Disproportionately, care trips are taken by individuals who are of lower income, mostly by women, disproportionately low income. And obviously, without transit, without availability of transit, a lot of these trips just don't get made. If you didn't have the kind of transit system that you have in Chicago today, it would cause at least a 12% drop in these trips. And that's a significant issue. If you can't get your elderly parent to a doctor's office, if you can't get your kid to school or to home care on time, if you can't buy groceries to feed the family, it's a really serious quality of life issue. Transit fills that gap. Next slide, please. Some people would say, in response to what I just said, well, people would just buy cars. It's like, well, maybe, but maybe not. The cost of owning a car is really high. It's over $10,000. And typically, generally, it's the second largest household item cost that anyone has other than where they live. So owning a car, maintaining a car is not a trivial cost. That's a cost that's rising, by the way. It's not going down. What we found is that every zero vehicle household in Chicago, if they purchased a car, it would cost them another 6.8 billion. But the truth is, many of those people won't be able to buy a car in the first place, right? 3/4 of Chicago, no car households are below the 400% poverty line level. And so people who can't even afford to buy a car, and there will be many people who fall into that category, will just lose access altogether. And losing access to opportunity is a really, really serious degradation of someone's quality of life. So takeaway from here is owning a car, keeping a car is expensive. It's getting more expensive. People in Chicago, over 639,000 households, have no vehicles. If they didn't have a functioning transit system, it would cost them more money that they can burden, a higher burden that they can absorb. Many of them lose access altogether. Next slide, please. And of course, a lot of people who depend on transit because they're not able to drive by age or ability. Over 1/3 of the residents of Illinois don't have a driver's license. And so access to transit is access to independence. Access to transit is access to opportunity for a whole broad spectrum of people who otherwise would be dependent on someone else or just lose access altogether. Next slide, please. One thing that is really good news in Chicago, in contrast to where I am in Boston, you've got transit really helps you keep your cost of living below the national average, right? You have a higher cost of living percentage of your income being paid for housing, but transit, the availability of CTA and what it offers, is providing Chicagoans with the advantage of having the 5th lowest transportation costs across the country and reduces your overall cost of living below the national average. So in a sense, what we're seeing in Chicago is that the transit system is a huge influence on overall cost of living. And again, I point out overall quality of life. Next slide, please. One thing that we really wanted to look at, which a lot of studies have not looked at, is the influence of transit on public health. And we all know, because we all hear about it, read about it every day, that there's an urgent need, an existential need to deal with climate change by reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Some people think, well, the solution to this is just put everyone in an electric vehicle and there'll be no more carbon tailpipe emissions, problem largely solved. Even if everyone in Chicago tomorrow was driving an electric vehicle, you would still have what we call particulate matter emissions, because particulate matter emissions, which is the subject of this slide, are the emissions that come from tires on pavement or brake friction. Those don't go away when you are driving an electric car. In fact, they might get worse because the electric vehicle, because of the size of the battery and the weight of the battery, is heavier than its internal combustion compact counterpart. And that heaviness will probably cause more tire friction, more particulate matter, or what we call PM 2.5. Particulate matter emissions are significant and they're serious. There are studies out of Harvard going back to 2020 and other places that show that people who lived in areas that had long-term exposure to particulate matter emissions had 15% higher COVID mortality rates. And what we see here is that in the Chicago area, PM 2.5 is concentrated on the south and west sides. We used an analytic approach that they use in London. In London, they have what's called an ultra-low emissions zone program. And they have studied particulate matter emissions in London. We used that analytical framework, applied it to Chicago, and determined that in 2021, particulate matter emissions contributed to at least 2,100 fatalities in Chicago. And so it's a serious public health issue, this issue of particulate matter emissions. Getting more people to not drive, whether it's an internal combustion engine vehicle or an electric vehicle, getting more people to use transit will help reduce particulate matter emissions. And that's important for everyone's health in Chicago and in the Chicago region. Next slide. So to wrap up, as you see, transit is important to reduce all the things that we say we want to do, whether it's here in Boston or you all in Chicago. We want to reduce traffic congestion. We want to improve travel time. We want to give more people better access to a variety of opportunities: work, education, healthcare, entertainment, seeing friends, the kind of social cohesion that makes cities really worth living in. The economic activity that hopefully will create a stronger, more equitable economy. All these things that we say we believe in, those of us who care about cities. Transit is the essential ingredient in making all those things happen, as you see by this data. And a 13%, 13x return on your investment, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Some people would say that's awesome. And we hope that this is enlightening. We're happy to answer your questions. Delighted to be able to share these thoughts with you and to hear your thoughts on what we're showing you. So thank you.
Thank you. This was an amazing presentation. I had the opportunity to see it twice. I was also in the regular board meeting. I do have one question, and it's more so about the additional analysis or the additional factors to consider about, you know, the ripple effects. Have you all, or are there other researchers looking into those factors to?
Yeah, so
decide?
we've actually following that study, I've been continuing discussion with CTA to discuss what additional analysis we want to perform, whether it is more in-depth, looking at more in-depth factor on that study, or expanding different scenarios as a next round. So in the next, hopefully, couple of weeks, we will start a follow-up study to that one based on some of the feedback that we received.
Wonderful. I look forward to seeing more about that.
We'll take questions and comments from the rest of the board members. Scott Vanderwell.
There's a slide indicating that the impact is $35.4 billion. I'm curious, that's here. Do we have any statistics that compare it to other communities that perhaps have lesser transit systems available than we do?
So the model we've developed at Argonne over the last 15 years has been deployed right now to 13 large metropolitan areas in the US. That accounts for about 25% of the population. So some of those also are high transit, but you know, like Atlanta, for example, but some others like Austin, I'd say very low. So we have not performed the economic analysis to these other cities, but based on some of the results of that study, interest we hear both from CTA as well as multiple agencies in Chicago, other transit agencies across the US, as well as some of the, like our Argonne is funded by the US Department of Energy. So we are engaging with USDOT right now, try to get more of a holistic view, and so use this first of a kind study and deploy it to other cities where we already have models for that have very different level of transit already implemented. So in progress in discussions, this was really the first of a kind that we are aware of in the US, but generating lots of interest both locally and nationally.
One quick last question is housing. If we were to eliminate transit, would the overall cost of housing go up substantially? In my mind, of thinking people wanting to be closer to work to decrease the impact of this?
Yes, and the interactions between zoning and, you know, housing and transit are significant. Chicago already has changed zoning close to the train stations. I live 5 minutes walking to one, and it's bubbling everywhere, right? Or it has been bubbling everywhere. So yeah, it is a big impact. The same way that, you know, COVID to some extent has changed the demand in housing. You know, everybody wants a 2-bedroom right now if they can afford it, because you work from home and you don't want to work in your bedroom. So, and people moving further away from their job actually, because they only have to come 1 or 2 days a week. So now, you know, everybody's coming back. What will that do? Right? If we think congestion is bad right now in Chicago, maybe wait 6 months to a year when more people will have to come back to work on a more regular basis. And, you know, if transit doesn't pick up the gap of these people, then congestion is going to be a lot worse than what it is now. And we know it's pretty bad already. So all these interactions between all the factors and the behavior is really what this model has been developed for. So to your point, yes, it has ripple effect on across the entire economy, right? And increasing rents is going to be also significant. I agree with you. That's not something we looked at, but that's definitely something that that we would expect.
Robert Castaneda.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of observations and a quick question. I'm assuming that the reason for the study, right, was to show, like, you know, the economic impact of a lack of transportation system here in Chicago. I don't think, I've not heard that like anybody plans on getting rid of it. So it's probably about the value that it brings, right? As we're talking about like budget deficits and all this other stuff. Within the city, right? I think if you talk to like owners of parking garages, like ridership is down. Obviously you see commercial buildings being converted to residential. So just like across the board, when it comes to the economy, things are shifting, things are changing. I wonder if, the assumption of why this was asked for, the study, can you kind of confirm, Tom, like what was the hope or the goal here?
Yeah, and there's a couple things there. One is we've got a couple of great and really smart partners. And you know, Argonne has been working with CTA in particular with our planning and innovation department for several years, right, to develop this model that they have, you know, that they have funding for. And we've been, you know, working with them, providing data as they develop this regional model that can look at a lot of things, right, to model every individual trip, as Aymeric said, right. It's a very unique model and a unique opportunity to utilize that model. So one is timing with respect to this investment that Argonne has been making in their model. The second is we've got, you know, partnership with MIT that looks at things both nationally and internationally, right? And they can sort of bring some additional value of the analyses and some additional resources to provide those analyses. And yeah, I think that part of what prompted this was the fact that, you know, we are looking at, you know, it's not a fiscal cliff, right? And, you know, thinking about the scenarios that are involved there. And I think we wanted to really sort of illuminate what is the value of transit here as we look to make sure that we continue to not only invest at historic levels, but look to potentially go beyond that. Because I think the number here that came out here that folks looked at and they said, oh, that's a lot bigger than the national number, was that 13x return, right? Which just shows we got a really high value of transit here in Chicago, in the Chicago region. We've got a really valuable asset that is unique here that we want to make sure that we understand the values that asset is delivering, not only sort of the traditional economic and travel time measures, but who and how and where those are impacting.
Thanks for sharing, Tom. And I believe the study did just that. I think one thing after hearing it that I would be really interested as you continue your work is obviously we're seeing a shift in where, like, from the what has historically been the primary financial district of the region, right? And so if we're talking about increasing ridership and ties to like the economy, like to me, it seems like there's the addition, right? People need to get to other places where the system aren't currently taking. So I'd be curious to see in the future, right? Like we already know that, right? Like where does our transportation system need to link to increase ridership, to get 13 times more, from the investment, right? So that instead of talking about disinvesting, we're talking about how we can invest more and impact more people, right?
Yeah, and so to your point, that is something that we've started to look at. One way we're looking at behavior changes and travel changes is we have access to a very large and detailed building database. So, we mentioned like some of the building used to be offices. Now there are people living there. Well, guess what? That changes everything, right? So we're regularly updating who lives where, who works where, where are the hospital, right? They usually don't change, but so we have all that detailed information. So when there is, a 30-story building that is converted, that we actually know it is converted because now we may have 1,000 or 1,500 people that now either will not go there to work or are going there and they need to go to work somewhere else, right? So based on that, what it means is how could transit change to then adapt to this new demand. So we've been working with Northwestern University to try to, quote unquote, redesign transit based on the new demand, right? Should we add rapid transit bus lane here because now we have higher frequency? Should we add a line here because now we have more demand? Should we take one off here because people are not going to work anymore in that location? So all of these are things that we've started to look at so that we can try to understand the trends in the past 5 years, but also based on those, understand what could happen in the next 5 years as well.
That sounds really helpful and exciting. Thank you.
Danielle Stanley.
Morning. Thank you so much for this presentation, and the data is very compelling. I had a political question. I know you were all in Springfield session, advocating for additional funding, and you're talking about the fiscal cliff to the agency. Was this data added to the conversations, and was it compelling to legislators invest more into CTA?
I think the short answer to that is yes, right? To get the data, I think it's a conversation, right? It's another point that we have in the conversation. I think there is a lot of general interest, across various communities in the study and the results of the study, and maybe some other questions that are coming out of it. But the short answer is yes, right? It was informative. It was another point in the conversation that we could bring forward as we're having those discussions about addressing sort of the big topic, which is that fiscal cliff.
Then my other question is the cancellations and the high numbers, the high percentage between low income and women. Did the report, speak to any recommendations to kind of curb that?
The transit?
Well, if I could say, I think the issue is
Go ahead, Jim.
keep investing in transit. One thing I'd like to say, since I run MIT's Transit Research Consortium, we have within the consortium agencies across the country, from Boston, New York, Washington, to Chicago, to San Francisco, to LA, to Seattle. There's not much I can say about Chicago that's unique to Chicago in terms of this looming fiscal cliff or the changes in ridership. These are dynamics that are happening everywhere. And so every agency, every urban area that has a major transit agency is facing the need, as Americ said, to think about the differences and to do an analysis that leads you to transit adaptation, right? What I see Chicago doing is actually taking the lead in thinking about these issues in a really important way. Cities and transit agencies are not dying. They are different. And what we're trying to do, what I know Argonne is doing, is understand the differences. For example, we did some research a year ago and found that about a third of the people who say they are working remotely are not working at home, that they're working from a third place, which means that they have a journey from home to that third place. It's just not their office, but it might be a coffee shop, it might be a WeWork, it might be another person's home. Understanding those changed journey patterns and those differences will help agencies adapt. The fear that I have as a person who thinks and works in this area a lot is that some folks in the sort of urban narrative think that, well, ridership is down, so we don't need to invest as much in transit. The opposite is true. In order to achieve the kind of transit adaptation that's necessary to meet the moment and increase ridership at the same time, you need new levels of fresh investment that help you think about responding to those changed journey patterns. And my perception and view is that most agencies, including Chicago, are doing this in real time, and it will provide real dividends once this work is completed.
Peter Henderson.
Wonderful, wonderful presentation from the three of you. My question was actually asked by Mr. Vanderwill, but this presentation does give a testimony to transit and a real eye opener about if you take it away, how are they going to get there? Because a lot of investors, a lot of businesses that come to the city of Chicago, the first thing is, how can I bring people to me? How is this going to be accessible to reach everybody, not just one group, not just one race? So this presentation was very wonderful, very good, helpful data. So appreciate all three of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Caroline Pavlovic.
Hi, just want to say this is a great presentation, very great data. I think there's some very strong evidence here for a move away from a car-centric society. And I think that, this makes a great case to see more investment in transit or changes implemented. One of the questions I had was, obviously in here, there's a sort of doomsday scenario where there's absolutely no transit. But do you have any data on how recent service cuts have impacted car ownership, emissions, like missing trips, things like all of the metrics that are discussed in here? Do you have any evidence of specific to the current situation?
So some of the metrics related to, I'd say, very recent CTA impacts. I'll let CTA talk about that. In terms of car ownership, usually those are released on a yearly basis. So we still need to wait a little bit more, probably another 6 months to really get an impact on the new vehicle sales and used vehicle sales. That's something we're tracking locally. But no, we have not seen a significant, it takes 2, 3, 4 years. Things don't happen in 6 months, right? So it takes a little bit more time to see how some of the last 2, 3 years have impacted. So we don't have any data on that. I don't know if CTA did an in-depth study on ridership and impact, but
No, in terms of this work, it was forward-looking, right? This was the model that's forward-looking, and I think Americ talked at the beginning, look about the service levels assumptions that went into this, and looking forward, right, was kind of that stable model and sort of iterating off of that one. So we don't have any of that information included here. Obviously, it takes a while for that to show up in the actual data.
Of course, I think that would be very good to, track.
Yeah, the one thing, right, if you're, and maybe get a picture in your head, right, if you're looking at congestion, right, you're looking at your Google map and you see some red and orange and red, and sometimes you see black. Right here, we need to think of another color. That's the way to think about it. It's just gridlock. It's pretty much that's what it looks like at the end. The city is gridlocked. Nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah.
Let me pause on that too, see if Jim has anything to add too, because I know he's looked at kind of nationally some of these things too. Jim, do you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, I think we have reached sort of an inflection point post-pandemic, right? And this is again true for across the country, where I think you see this phenomenon of greater congestion. It's happening here in Metro Boston, happening in Chicago. It's happening everywhere. And there are antidotes to it. The antidotes are getting more people. Now, I don't believe the antidote is getting more people to work remotely, right? I actually think that's really bad for social cohesion. I think it's important for people to mix into society more frequently, which is what transit enables you to do. If the only people you see all day long look like you in the mirror, that's not good for social cohesion. It just isn't. And so transit has this larger societal role to play. And as I like to say to people, it responds very effectively to all the things we say that we care about in this country. right? We care about social cohesion. We care about building an equitable economy. We care about reducing emissions. We care about public health, and we care about quality of life. Transit intersects each and every one of those in a really positive way.
Yeah, of course. You also mentioned the London ultra low emission zone, which a
Yes.
key component of that is the congestion charging.
Yes.
Have you considered did you consider that in any of your models on Chicago or any other US cities at all? What the impacts of that would be?
Yeah, we actually did in a separate study, we look at congestion pricing for Chicago. Simple way to, I'd say similar way than London has been implementing it. And it changes, like some people are more or less sensitive to pricing, obviously. What we assumed was that a non-negligible portion of the revenues would be injected back into transit. And looking at what the impacts were, I don't have the numbers in mind. I can please follow up with me after, but yeah, we did look at congestion pricing for Chicago, Atlanta, and Austin, I believe. So that's the three metro areas we looked at.
Yeah, of course. Your team's, oh, sorry.
Can I say a quick word about road pricing because it's been in the news lately, given
Yes.
what happened in New York? I think it's a highly, frankly, misunderstood topic. I just want to underscore a couple of dynamics are going on. One dynamic, which is really urgent nationally and in Chicago, is the need to make sure that every major urban transit agency avoids hitting this fiscal cliff, right? They're all in the same position. Ridership is down. That means fare revenue is down, but we still need to invest for the reasons we just laid out. And transit needs support for their operating budgets. That's a matter of some national urgency. There is a larger, longer term issue which people need to keep their eyes on, and that is that as we transition in this country to a more electric vehicle-oriented fleet, the gas tax is going away. Gas tax is no longer going to be the stable, reliable revenue source, and something will need to replace it. That leads me to think that over time, people will look at pricing roads, what people call congestion pricing, but there are lots of ways to do it, as a solution to transit funding, or a part solution to transit funding, and a part solution to replacing the gas tax. The one thing I'll underscore, because I think it needs to be said, the gas tax is highly regressive. It really, really hits lower income people hard. Road pricing, congestion pricing can be means tested. It can be made dynamic. You can change it and vary it from time of day to region and by income. And so it can be designed in a way that's a lot less regressive, a lot more responsive to equity concerns than the gas tax in a million years could never be. And so as you're all thinking about this as a policy issue, which we're doing in Boston as well, I think it's important for people to know that it can be a very agile tool that responds the way we would like it to respond to issues of income inequality and equity. It's very different than a static thing like the gas tax.
Of course. Last but not least, I know your work seems very, very interesting, and I know a lot of other people who might be interested in what you're doing from different lenses, from public health, from sort of an urban planning standpoint. Is there any way that we can like stay in contact with you or like be up to date with things that your team is working on going forward?
Yeah, definitely. All our results, because they are funded by the US government, are made publicly available. So we can check, but yeah, you go to our websites, all our papers, results, highlights are there. We usually try to publish one newsletter per week. So next Monday, Tuesday, there is actually an article that will be published by Argonne on that study that will be released. Happy if I have your
through the
contact
secretary, we
information.
can just provide that if that works for you.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, every topic changes every weekly. They're all transportation decarbonization. So that's probably the best way to get like the 30-second highlights as to what we
Yeah.
recently.
Of course, yeah, and if you have like any business cards or anything, I'd be happy to take that or pass it along to others.
Okay, Vice Chair Rob Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple questions. I just wanted, I think Robert already answered, or he asked one of my questions, the reason for the baseline set in scenario 2. But with regard to scenario 1, I just wanted to make sure I'm kind of like the reason for this study, and we've already made mention of kind of like the political background that all of this is taking place under. When we kind of freeze all the other agencies' service levels at 2024, we are changing the CTA service levels to like a full recovery. When we say transit and kind of the importance of transit in this study, are we really saying kind of the importance in the business case for CTA specifically in this study, or
Everyone. So it's all the transits within the city, and so that includes all transit agencies.
got it? Then, yeah, I'm a little, could we make the business case then of like a full recovery for both PACE and Metra as well, or, you know, additional service even?
Yes, I mean, yes, we could do that. What you'll see is probably if we are increasing the baseline, then we will just make everything will go worse. Right. But probably by a little bit, because CTA is still very much the driver in a lot of the transit. So you'll see like it was not that much better. Numbers, you know, I would say are driven by CTA. You know, I mean, in Chicago, in and around Chicago.
Okay. Thank you. And then my other question, I just, another factor I was kind of thinking about, and I'm glad this slide, we kind of ended on that slide. We talked about the impact. Was there consideration, and I have no idea how you'd begin to calculate this. I feel like a lot of this is maybe subjective, but I'm thinking anecdotally, if we're in this doomsday scenario where you remove all transit from Chicago, you know, I wouldn't buy another car. I would leave. I would move to a city with transit, right?
Yeah, and that's what we say is like this is almost this case of worst case.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah.
Things that are like, and people would leave and companies would leave. And because if
Exactly, yeah.
why in my office? How can I go to a city where people can travel? And so this is almost the best case of the worst case. Like
Yes.
it's like this is really big numbers, but the final number is much better.
Right, okay, because, yeah, and past lives.
I would also say, just as a point, that worst case scenario is where you get to if you begin to either statically invest or disinvest in transit, right? I mean, that's, to me, the larger point, is you end up there at some point if you fail to grapple with the need to maintain and increase investing in urban transit. That's the reality of it. So it becomes a spiral, and that's what you need to avoid, and you want to avoid, because it's very hard to get out of that spiral once you're in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you were getting to exactly where I was going, where, you know, I feel like we are almost in a, I don't know, what is it? The frog in the boiling water, where we're just so used to congestion now, like another 33% probably rings a little hollow to people. But in my head and, you know, in my professional life as well, I would contend that there's a way worse problem than congestion out there. Like, you think there are cities where congestion isn't a problem, and it's not for a great reason, right? And I feel like this makes a great business case. If we're talking like doomsday, there's a way scarier place.
Yes, I completely agree. Yep.
Thank you.
Dr. Parnell?
Yeah, this was a really great presentation. And I actually want to pick up on that thread too. I mean, I think, you know, the business case is really clear from this, and something that's really important to make. But I think it was really refreshing to hear, like, kind of shifting the conversation about transit to just like daily quality of life and the trips you're taking, not to work, but just to do the daily tasks of your life. I think that's like a really powerful argument to make to the public. And then I think especially slide 16 about, you know, the low transportation costs, like to me, and in my personal experience of being in school here in Chicago the past few years and not having an income, like my low transportation costs are like the reason I can afford to live in the city of Chicago. So I think for me, those two arguments are something that like the CTA should be, you know, pitching more to the public. And yeah, I guess I don't have a specific question, but just venting some frustration with the current administration here in Chicago that I think talks a lot about, you know, investing in the city, about how Chicago is one of the best cities in the world. But like this data makes clear to me that the CTA and our transit is a reason for that. And yet they're not, you know, making it a priority of the administration, which is, I think, pretty frustrating for a lot of the public of Chicago. So just wanted to comment on that and thanks for a great presentation.
Aiden?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. My question kind of builds a little bit on what Robert Castaneda was talking about with shifting populations, shifting business priorities, and it relates to bus versus rail. You know, on one of the first slides, you kind of showed the very big difference in metro versus bus and commuter rail and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, you know, when you look at like the 13x return on investment, when you're talking about priorities, maybe Tom, this is a question for you as well. But when you look at, you know, capital improvement on rail versus maybe something like BRT on Western, which is, you know, obviously a discussion right now. I'm just wondering how you evaluate that. And in this kind of doomsday scenario, what percentage of that is like lost bus service versus lost rail service? And, you know, economic impacts of bus versus.
Yeah, so in our scenario, everything's gone, right? Bus, rail, everything. Now, when we are looking at how to do that, obviously it is also a lot more efficient in terms of cost to our new bus lines than to our new rail lines, right? Rail is expensive. You're looking at the city, it's not gonna happen. So it will happen, but at very high cost, like on the south side. So part of what we've been looking at expanding ridership has been BRT at Western. You know, I did Western, so I'm kind of interested. And adding bus lanes is a really good way to connect all the dots and the connections, right? So you don't have to build anything else. You just have to make sure that you have, you know, the new line there. Making sure that we have rapid transit bus lane, like in Chicago, for example, Avenue. You know, that's and how that's changing, right? That's a lot of our focus right now.
Thanks. Yeah. And then the second question I had was related to the return on investment number. Obviously, 13 times is a pretty good number.
And any investor would just be super happy to spend out. Yes.
But I'm wondering, obviously, you always want to be better. And obviously, there are probably places in the country where it is better. I imagine, you know, maybe, I don't know. I don't expect it, but I'm curious as to what would get that number up. Do you think that it's an increased density, right? Like if there's more people near trains, is it timing of service? Like what makes that number and what is it?
So the reason why that number is higher in Chicago than in other, and by the way, we haven't done New York, for example, or others, but I'm assuming that number is very low in Boston, New York, and other, you know, very highly dense populated. The reason why it is 4x is you're looking at every single city in the US, and so the higher density is definitely a key. And then, you know, the fact that I think we have or had or will have or still have a CBD, you know, where everybody is going from kind of some of the same areas to the same area makes it that you can actually increase ridership per bus. So that's, you know, if all the workplaces are scattered everywhere, right, that makes it hard. This is not the place. This is not the case in Chicago, right? A lot of people are going to kind of like some of the same areas, whether it's West Loop or downtown or others. And so that means it's like you can actually design a system that is efficient because a lot of the people are trying to go to the same places. So it's density and also the geography of the city that makes it help.
Structural issue rather than an administrative one is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the more people move from A to B at the same time, right, better it is.
Ryan McCray?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I loved it. I saw within it like my own story with Chicago. I like to consider myself the transplant representative on this board. I moved here 2 years ago because I tried to live without a car in Austin, Texas, and I did not enjoy that. And I find I very much enjoy it here. I'd like to start, I guess y'all briefly brought up like environmental impacts of, transit after a fiscal cliff doomsday scenario. Thank you for calling out that EVs do not solve the problem of tire pollution. I mean, it's what 78% of ocean microplastics are from tires, and that's going to be made worse with electric vehicles because they're heavier and they break your tires first. And we briefly mentioned like the gas tax problem. A tire tax is what I would love, but congestion pricing, the variable rate is probably better. I really liked how we talked about monetizing the many efficiencies with transit. For 70 years, departments of transportation have been monetizing the time saved with 20-lane highways, and the money saved by demolishing homes and getting us to live further apart from each other is, I think, one of the biggest like unprosecuted crimes of the last century. I love that we're thinking about transit in this business case and this money saving space because it's the $1 investment to $13 of economic output. I believe it. It's what I'm here for. It's what makes this city prosperous. So yeah, I'd also like to say thanks for mentioning the zoning implications of owning a car. You know, every 2 parking spaces that we build, I think is a good starter studio apartment. And so every single car I see is just a waste of space. And sorry, you were really preaching to the choir for this presentation. I loved every aspect of it. And I'm almost done. Really, my final point was, I guess Caroline, I thought, brought up a good point where the effects of having less transit directly leading to more car ownership. I think we had the yellow line shut down for like 2 months. I bet you we look at car ownership rates along the yellow line, we'll see car ownership rates increasing. And I think that the CTA not yet publicizing the reason why we kept it shut for so long is
and one of the issues is car ownership, right? It's sunk cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the, this is if you make a decision because you have to open on gap, this is the 10-year impact.
Absolutely.
And so that has long-term consequences. It's not just short-term. It's you own a car, you use it. Anything once you have sunk costs, you just go.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for doing this work. I think it's going to lead to a much prosperous future for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and I also want to thank the rest of the staff who's worked on this as well too, because it hasn't just been the 2 of us or just me, right? You got a whole planning and innovation group that's been working with Argonne for several years. MIT does a number of projects with us as well. This is one of several that they've done as well, and I'm glad that we got the visibility and the chance to share this with you. So thank you.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And is this available on both Argonne and CTA's websites?
Definitely on ours.
Oh, just on Argonne?
It's definitely on ours. I don't know if you're where it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, our next presentation is from our Communications and Marketing Department. They'd like our perspective and feedback on the new customer information and rail timetable platform poster. Our presenter is Tony Capoletta, CTA's General Manager of Customer Information. Good morning. Hello, or good afternoon. Sorry.
Yeah, and what I'm presenting is a little bit broader than that, but yes, that is absolutely part of it. I'll give you an overview of things. Let me get this slideshow running. Share the screen. I'm there. Sorry about that. Sorting. So I'm Tony Capoletta. I'm CTA's General Manager of Customer Information. I'll tell you a little bit about me just so you know who I am. I've been here for like a little over 15 years, which is wild to say because it feels like it's just a few. I grew up in Chicago, riding CTA, absolutely love the system, and grew up in a transit dependent household, and I'm a person who chooses not to own a car because it's something that I really believe in and love. And I'm here to try and find ways to make it better, particularly from the perspective of someone who grew up depending on it and knows what it's like to stand at a bus stop and need information. And being an information designer, this is a great place to be. So first, I'll start with just a little overview of customer information. We're essentially the designers and people behind our design system, design language, and how people engage with services. That ranges from signs to timetables to maps and digital information and more. Obviously, digital is probably one of the most exciting areas. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is some of the things in the physical universe and improvements that we're making to try and make the system more usable, approachable, and easier for people to comprehend and navigate, particularly new riders, unfamiliar riders, newcomers to Chicago, people who are coming back to transit and looking at the status quo and the existing constructs, many of which date back from before the digital era, and how to make those more relevant today and complementary to how people are using digital information. So that said, what customer information consists of is a handful of different groups. That includes our publications unit run by Adina Rollins, a manager in my area. They do basically all of our customer alerts, cartography, brochures, just general publications, the kind of things that you find in stations, as well as kind of coordinate sign plans and other information surrounding your work with that affects service that people need to know about. Graphics department, of course, is the core graphics department for the CTA. These are just a couple examples of the kinds of things that they do. They range from ads to actually laying out those alerts to, some of the fun stuff. And they're also the keepers of our brand and look and feel and are core to having a consistent look and feel and design language across the system. Reprographics is kind of a production arm of customer information, our copy center and print shop. These look like very sort of back office kind of images, but the level of skill that the team there has, they're run by, I need to mention all of our managers. Graphics is run by Steve Wallach. Reprographics is run by Dela Abui. And they print just massive volumes of information, both customer facing things and internal things, documents, training manuals, forms, the kind of stuff that you need throughout an agency. So they're the print center basically. My original role was actually in external electronic communications, which is now managed by Will Anderson. That includes our website, digital signage, design and placement, and actually our social media accounts, which were developed in the customer information area because first, how do we provide stuff that people need to travel, not just a marketing perspective, but of course, our social media platform, works with our marketing and communications groups at large to make sure that we're telling our story and really representing, all the things that may be interesting or relevant and keep people up to speed with our system. And last is signage and wayfinding, run by Victor Ramirez. And is a really modest but incredibly talented team that does probably some of the most visibly recognizable things that are part of what I would think of as the visual language of Chicago in a really meaningful way. And so that's signage throughout stations. It's the design of bus stop signs. It's the theory about how we help people from the curb to the platform and make sure that all those things that people are getting just what they need, just the right places without overwhelming them in a way that's consumable and calm and easy to navigate. But they also do the designs of rail car maps and bus stop signs and signage that you'd find along the right of way in our railroad. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on inside of customer interaction. You know, a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis is kind of what I would say is, you know, nuts and bolts kind of work. You know, it really ranges from the day-to-day to getting to come up with new ways of trying to make the system easier to use and better. It's all about user experience. It's all about thinking about how people engage with the system and the network. And so I want to go over some of the kind of more recent things that we've done. Most of this, again, is going to focus on digital, sorry, not digital, but physical space improvements and how some of those link together. As we step back, particularly from COVID, where a lot of things were really kind of on pause and in emergency mode and just maintenance mode, where we're going back now and saying, okay, what's in our toolkit? How can we make it better? How can we redesign that? How can we make that easier to consume? And what is it that riders need that we think is going to help benefit them? So this is a little bit about moving forward in those spaces. And so I'll go over some of the things you've probably already been seeing, as well as some new things that we're working on. One of them is better signage from the platform to the street. One of those is better out signage that has a little bit more detail and a more consistent information hierarchy. A lot of what we had before this department existed and before my predecessor had started really upgrading our sign system, which I think is, to be totally honest, I think, you know, when I travel and I visit places like London, I think we're nearing London level standards of information and where things need to be in decision points to make sure that you never lose your path when you go through a station. And so we're now looking at what else can we upgrade. So for example, here we've introduced an out patch that you'll start seeing in more and more stations. So when you get off a train and you're trying to figure out which way is out, there's this bright yellow thing that you can home in on. And we've seen that in a lot of other systems. New York has a big red exit. France has sortie backlit on signs. London has their way out signs, and Berlin has Ausgang. But all of them have this one very consistent thing that is a patch and is never modified, and it's always there. And so we're starting to implement that. And you see a little bit better wayfinding here after we upgraded the Grand Blue Line station to get out to buses, particularly because there's a major tourist destination that you transfer to. And I'll get to that system with the letters there in a moment, because that's kind of exciting to me. And I think a lot of people are scratch their head about it if they don't understand it, but there's a logic here, and it's a good one. We're also looking at even, you know, kind of regular things like decals. A lot of our old decals from the 70s and 80s are all text, and in English or English and Spanish, and to try and better serve people who have trouble dealing with complicated seas of text, or people with limited English proficiency. We're moving toward a universe of more language agnostic pictograms supplemented with language for those who aren't great at interpreting a pictogram, which can be any number of people for any number of reasons. So we're trying to make sure that we balance both, but not overwhelm. So we're also simplifying and reducing text and doing more with visual symbols that hopefully help everybody. We've redesigned our bus stop signs. You've probably noticed the difference kind of happening around the city. It's subtle, but these are what we like to think are really thoughtful changes. We have decluttered the signs a little bit, and we've created an information hierarchy where the information is always in the same order. So when you go from one route to the next, you don't have to sort of think about the whole sign and figure out what's what. It always reads now in the order of route number, route name, service description, and then map. And then that way the sign is a lot easier to consume and consistent in how you consume it. You don't have to rethink it every time you look at it. We've also made the route number stand out a little bit more because it could get kind of lost in a sign that had a lot of text. Route number is obviously really important for navigation. Most cities kind of have a badge system for it. And so without completely reinventing our bus stop signs, we've moved to having one. And there are also some subtle cues built into that. You see here, a regular local route uses a neutral color and has a solid fill badge because it runs all day. Routes that don't run all day or have very specific hours on the days that they run have a hollow badge to indicate this is not one of the primary services where you're standing. That's not meant to be something that people have to learn or have explained to them. It's a you know, kind of subconscious and intuitive cue out that. We also still maintain, even though it's of course described in text, because we're not going to rely on color for information. for colorblind reasons. We've also maintained the construct that express routes use red, limited stop routes, which we have a few, will use green, thinking more in the X route sense versus the true expresses with big stretches. And, Jump has corporate blue and the N5 has night owl. And we use those in places that are specific to where you're standing too. So it's relevant in a hyper local sense. We're also experimenting with some new special sign types. Here's an example on the left of a temporary sign that we've put up along where Clark buses get rerouted to. One of the things that I've always felt that we could do better at is that, we tell you where the bus goes when it's rerouted. But having better information at the stops along a reroute is something that I'm trying to figure out how to do, particularly as this is one that happens all the time after every Wrigley Field event. To make sure that when you go over to Racine, you know that you really are standing where you should be for the next 22. We're also looking at things like historically, when we close the bus stop, we put up an alert. And then once the stop is no longer in service, the sign comes down. But sometimes that means the alert too. So a solution to that is maintaining a sign that says this bus stop is closed, keeping the alert up. So people, once it's happened, if they're not there, the week before it happens, can learn where they should go. And even finding temporary and quick ways to do that. Like here is an example of using banner material to bag a sign for a temporary period, which is potentially really useful around events. So we're going to be piloting that and experimenting with that soon. And I want to talk a little bit about the new stop identifiers that people ask us questions about. And because we've only done it in a few places, we haven't talked about it too much. But we refer to them as the lollipops playfully internally. You would see these in London or Brighton, England, and a few other cities. And basically, these tie into the wayfinding scheme from rail to bus, and this helps improve bus transfers. So if you look at a neighborhood map, you'll find that we actually mark all the stops with a stop letter already. And then there's a bus connections list that shows you, say, 65 Grand, east to Navy Pier. And we're now increasing the places station by station and intend to do this citywide. It could take us a year or two to get there, but I'm trying to find ways to streamline it. Where at any place where you would transfer from rail to bus, you can look at this on the wall. It may be integrated into signage. This is actual signage from Grand on the Blue Line, a photograph pointing for Navy Pier boarded stop E. And so you've got this information posted on the wall, posted in the connections diagram, posted on signage. And then when you come outside, there's that big, and if you go up the wrong steps, see that from across the street, even if you have no sense of direction, you're trying to figure out which way eastbound is, you can spot the E and get there a lot easier. This I find really useful in other places that have it. I intend to increase awareness of this in Chicago and with station staff and places as we roll it out. And also hope to have it integrated into digital trip planning. So it says, after you get off the Blue Line, go to eastbound, Grand Halstead, stop E, which is what you'll find in other cities that do this. All that is part of the bigger plan. We're also doing new brochures. A lot of our brochures, just because we're a pretty modest team, kind of tend to update as needed, but some stuff has fallen further behind than I would like. So we're doing a complete overhaul of all of our print materials and stations, which a lot of people may not even realize are there, but there are a good kit of print materials. I'm updating them all. I'm refreshing them all. I'm making them easier to consume. We're adding to this to include particularly where we know that there are pain points for people with limited English proficiency and new riders in general, new how to ride guides, fare information guides. That'll be in multiple languages. We're going to redo our accessibility brochure because that has been updated in years. And most importantly, we're going to make sure it's easy to find. So we've started installing brochure holders in stations system-wide in the unpaid area of every station. That is the goal. And to put these out in the open. So it's never that you have to know that this is there or ask for it, that you walk into a station, you can get this stuff. If you want a timetable to take home with you, the complete route timetable with all the details, these will be ready available in every station. And if the station staff is helping someone else, you can help yourself to this. You're not stuck waiting or say they're otherwise unavailable. They had to run to the washroom or something. This helps solve some of that need for better information as you enter. So I'll keep moving here because I do want to be sensitive to time. we do have a new alert design that you're probably starting to see. We've kind of compartmentalized it and streamlined it a little bit for readability and consumability. Additions to this are, for example, we put the impact at the top and then also something like weekend. So if you are a weekday rider and you see 6 alerts in front of you at Clark Lake, and you only ride during rush hour, you know you can skip this one. And that this doesn't matter to you. So we can help people hopefully, because we know people don't read all the alerts. It's just a lot sometimes. We have a lot of stuff going. This is a way to hopefully help people figure out and home in on just what matters to them and pay more attention to it and have it catch their eye. Another thing that we're doing is we're adding a QR code that links directly to the alert where possible. Some alerts are recurring, so they have multiple alerts. So we'll link to maybe the route page or something like that. But that helps also in an LEP context because many people's phones can auto-translate a web page. So we know that when things are abnormal, we have lots of riders who speak languages other than English as their primary language. Disruptions can be a serious pain point because it's hard to wrap your head around what that means. And get people to digital stuff that they can take with them, especially if the train's pulling in, they didn't have time to read this, or to a translated version. We think is somewhere that we really want to bring this next and emphasize and get people used to. We're also looking at improving our website and integrating emerging services like large language model translations services, what people refer to as AI, of course, that is better than traditional translate websites that can give better and clearer information and just make that integral to what is shown when you pull up a customer alert. So we can serve more people in more languages better. And so getting to the timetable posters, we're looking at all these materials and stations and we're saying, what is it that people are using? These tend to be in places that people breeze by. And it's a combination of a grid and a lot of headways. And we've been thinking that, people may not, personally, I don't see people use these. It's hard to get, a lot of really empirical evidence of what's being looked at. But I think people tend to breeze by these materials, and this is a particularly complicated one. Obviously, it's important that we have, complete schedule information, which we're, putting more in people's hands. It's in trip planners, it's online, but for the purposes on a platform, I think most people are looking to just get a sense of how the train is running. First train, last train are really important information, though, just in case you're like, when do I have to be back by, right? So we've started looking at a design that we're going to be piloting soon. And looking very closely for customer feedback on, of course, that turns this into a simpler grid by time of day with first train, last train, and intervals that we think will be a lot easier to consume and wrap your head around in a snap when that's really what you're looking for now that you're already there and probably just care about the next train. I'll zoom in on what that grid looks like. It's certainly a lot less busy and overwhelming and less of a sea of text than the old ones. And like I said, of course, we're increasing the availability of a print schedule that you can take with you to make sure that there is no less information available in the station as part of the process. And of course, as people switch to trip planners, I think recent data shows 88% of people, if I'm remembering correctly from some numbers I was hearing from an RTA survey, have smartphones, which emphasizes how important print still is. But 97% of people in general have internet access one way or another, if I'm remembering these numbers correctly. And then because this gives us a little bit of negative space, and you know how small some of our station entrances are, real estate is precious. And one of the problems that I've been trying to solve is how do we help familiarize people with alternatives in the event of a disruption? It's something that we've talked about a lot. And so we see this also as an opportunity to potentially add on a per station basis, bespoke information that riders will see not during an emergency, which is probably the worst time to try and learn something new and figure out where you need to be, what the alternatives are for the station that they use. And then also just know that that's there when they need it if they don't really retain that information. So I'll show you what that might look like at Pulaski on the Orange Line. Sentimental for me because it's the first place I stepped foot on the L, helping my mother find her way to work a new way. But this you see here, this can be really easily expressed in like, these are your 3 options depending on where you're going. The stop letter system plays into it to ease that navigation. And so we hope this is found to be a really lovely improvement actually to just kind of what's on the wall as you pass through. and simplify that information and make it more consumable. Now that is not, of course, everything that we're working on. We're doing tons of things with digital signage. Some of these you've seen, other ones you might have seen or might just be seeing anew. You know, we have really wonderful looking compared to a lot of cities, kind of full color boards that tie into our signage system and design language for community, for, comprehensibility. You see here a sign at 95th Dan Ryan that's more like an airline terminal departure board because it is essentially like an airline terminal. Those we want to expand to other places, say Jefferson Park or other big bus terminals. We think that's really good information. Those integrate stop letters in it. We're planning to integrate as we roll out the stop letter plan, more of that in digital signage. And then, of course, most of you may have seen newer buses now have to the stop information with transfer information and also in the new 7000 series rail cars. That's all our own design work. We do a lot of looking at how other cities do this and check in with them to see what problems they're solving and try to bring some of those good ideas home and share with them what we're working on too, which is really exciting work for me to do. So with that is kind of an overview of what we're working on. I'd love to get more into digital signage. I know we have limited time today, so maybe that'll be a presentation in the future. But with that, I guess I'll ask if there are any questions.
Thank you. This was really great. I will say that the signage has improved so much since I first started taking PTA. And I also have a sweet spot for Pulaski because I went to Curie.
I here too. I'm a
Okay, so I did want to ask a question about some of the out signage. So I've had a chance to visit some of those cities that you mentioned, London, Paris, and they do have like the exit signage sortie. But they also have those exit signs in all of their public spaces, like all of it's kind of like how we in America have the red exit sign. We know that that's our exit.
Yeah.
And they know sortie is their exit. So I'm just wondering what the thinking was around using the word out in that color scheme versus using what's typically known to us.
That's an interesting question. That stems from my predecessor, who I should give credit to on a lot of the signage improvements. This is building on work that he did as well. But law has CTA use out, like London uses way out, but also does, use the kind of the standard green exit sign for other places. These are marking a path out of the station, but not necessarily a fire exit. So we discern between using out and exit. And exit could mean an emergency exit, including crash bar gates and that sort of thing. Out is more station wayfinding to specific streets in the ways that we normally want you to move out of the station. So there's just a little bit of discernation there.
That's helpful. I just wanted to understand what the thinking was.
Yeah. Great question.
And I think I had another question and I just lost it. That's okay. We'll move on to other folks and if I think of it.
Okay. Peter Henderson.
Wonderful presentation. This hits home to me because I love maps and wayfinding. I'd love to help y'all because even after this presentation, I'll show you what I work on because I always think about evolutionizing the system and wayfinding and all of this. But there was one specific thing in the conceptual updated station timetable, which says in the event of a major delay, which was going back to talk to, okay, how can we improve this to, let's say, hey, if this does happen, let's keep it the same. That way we don't have people running all everywhere every time a station happens or a delay happens or, something like that. Let's say, okay, if they're doing construction work over there, we know I have to take this bus to this bus and it's the same reroute, just a different street, but the signage is still the same and the way to get around it is the same. So I really love this. This is really, like I said, hits home to me, but it also shows the thing that's going on in Chicago, like evolutionizing how can we give more information, but like concise, but also a different outlook because like I said, there are some station signage that is still, used within the 80s and the 90s. Still have some stuff I look at because my grandma was a motor woman years ago. So there's some stuff I look at that say, hey, this is the same, but this is really unique, and I like how CTA and you guys are putting your team together to actually put out this kind of information and say, hey, this is something that's gonna be better. You can read, it's more informational, things of that nature. So again, great work to your team, wonderful job, and this presentation, chef's kiss.
Thank you. Not a problem. Say, I do try not to rest on the laurels of having something that works well and constantly and look saying, what else can we do? How can we make this better? And yeah, from being a kid who used to draw his own transit maps to get to do this for a living. So it's great.
Rob Jones,
No question. Thank you for your time.
Aiden Keith.
Yeah, I got off the Grand Blue Line stop here, and I really appreciate the concept of having the numbered bus stops. I think, applying that across the system would be great. The Howard 95th. Every so often I'm like, I take the train all the time, but I'm confused about for which bus and that. So I think that's super helpful. And I think in the emphasis which you mentioned on, keeping that consistent with wayfinding online, with Google Maps, with Apple Maps, with whatever people are using, I think that's huge. I see tourists all the time, with their phones kind of looking around where to go. So I think that's a huge emphasis. In regards to the timetable, I would say that I agree with you. I don't know, and I don't see people using them very often. I think online is much more heavily used. And I think in terms of arrival times, I'm often piecing together multiple things, right? Like I'm using Google Maps to figure out where I'm going, but then I use I don't know if you've ever used the Transit Stop app to figure out when arrival times are coming. So I think, maybe as a larger initiative in the future, and I'm sure you look at this all the time, but coming up with better ways to get real-time arrival information in one place with maybe some wayfinding involved and very clear instructions would be super helpful for a lot of people. Because sometimes I'm, going across multiple things to try to figure out, the best way to get somewhere. So
Yeah, I think as we think of the journey, we know that a lot of people they do the planning before they go. Once they're in the station, they just want to know what's next.
Right.
Recognizing that's providing information. Navigable, but what you're saying is exactly, I think what we hope to be doing successfully, and that is tying these things together so you have a consistent breadcrumb trail using the same language and bits along the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Ryan McCray.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Just one quick question about, I'm assuming was a digital signage experiment. This was in the train stations where occasionally, instead of the next oncoming train and the train after that and having the times it'll be here in 5 minutes, those were replaced with, red line, it's every 7 minutes. When's the next one coming? Don't worry about it. It comes every 7 minutes. Was that just a quick experiment and did it stop? Or I guess I'm asking about the status of it.
We started that actually many years ago at terminals because they would give specific times, but very often during rush hour, we're more focused on just maintaining the interval coming out of the terminal. And so, you'd have a situation where, say, a delay occurred and now Orange Line is just trying to keep up to every 7 or 8 minutes. But they're not lining up with the exact times. And so you'd have somebody say at midway, look at the screen and say, I've got 6 minutes. And then they'd go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a coffee and a train would leave in 4. We're actively trying to keep the service running. It's not about necessarily that time, but making sure that we have even trains and they're not getting overcrowded and even spacing across the line. And so that's just been expanded a little bit in areas nearer terminals because it's a similar situation as the people in operations do their best to keep the railroad running as well as they can with the resources that they have available. But we're still keeping our ear to the ground for feedback from customers.
Okay, yeah, perfect. My feedback is I don't like them. I want to know when the next train is.
Okay. No, that's completely fair feedback to have, and we do a lot of sort of balancing, asking ourselves, is this the right choice, and reconsidering those things as well. Don't take the position that we have a monopoly on good ideas, and so we're always open to rethinking things and changing them.
Yeah, perfect. I love that we're experimenting. This was just one experiment I didn't like. So I love it. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you for the feedback.
Dr. Parnell.
Yeah, great presentation. Just want to second basically everything that Aiden said. That was what I was going to say. So, definitely the digital integration of like the bus stop identifiers, I think will make a huge difference. Cause yeah, I've like noticed it and been like, what is going, like, what is this? Like, so yeah, like digital integration and just like, making it clear that this is kind of a new, nomenclature. For
Yeah, I think that'll really bring it home as
Yeah, definitely.
pervasive across the city. Right now, it's largely in places where we experimented, where it was like Sheridan, the buses are half a block away, so that could be helpful there. Coming out of a subway like Grand, you don't know which way you're facing. And we did it fully across the RPM corridor, because we had a lot of people who were moving from stations that were open or closed to bus. And we did it on the west side when we did the Forest Park branch rebuild, and so there was a big expansion there. But as it gets to be more and more, we'll try to make sure that everyone's benefiting from it, using it as well.
So
Caroline Papelbon.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Couple of comments. I really like the focus on icons and signage and having more bilingual stuff. I especially think there's like opportunity to put up more bilingual signage. Like if you have a lot of, let's say, Spanish speakers or Polish speakers or any other language in a given neighborhood, like having more bilingual signs would be awesome. Another thing I was thinking about was about reroutes. I see you've got these like special sign types, like the bus stop closed bag that like a supervisor can put over a sign. I guess I was just wondering, I'm thinking of an experience I had a couple months ago. I was with my friend and we were trying to get on the 22, but it got rerouted because I think it was like police activity or something and the street was closed. I think there could be maybe like, something else that the supervisor puts up, like maybe they put the bags over those stop things, but then they also put up, like something that looks kind of like an easel, that says like, this is the temporary 22 stop or something like that. Like just have a supervisor put it up anytime there's a reroute.
Yeah, the bags will, because that requires a ladder. Probably
Yeah.
in a situation like that. But we do actually have some handwritten signs that supervisors, if they can get there in time and reroutes going on, handwrite some instructions. I'm actually looking and reviewing some of those to see if we can make that better and make that happen a little more consistently. Obviously, there are so many people who can get out to a place and then visit every stop and do that. But I also agree that that's a great idea. So it is something that we're looking into and trying to see the practicality of doing more of that.
Yeah, if there's anything you can put at a stop, that would be.
As a rider.
Yeah.
Same thing. So I do see that.
Thank you.
Danielle Stanley.
Yeah, just want to say thank you for the presentation and then your department's openness to change and feedback. It just means a lot, especially as we're dealing with, different transit changes, road closures, construction. So just thank you for always being on the toes and constantly, evolving your efforts.
Thank you. And I'll credit my team for being amazing and being agile as, we get surprised too sometimes. We do our best to try and make sure that we're getting the.
Scott Vanderwill.
I find it interesting to recognize who people are tourists. I don't know about the rest of you, but I can spot a tourist at 300 yards.
Yes.
After having been here for a while. And their absolute confusion as to how to use CTA and to get from point A to point B. I really wish that there were QR codes all over the place that said trip planner. Because I use the trip planner on the phone all the time, and I must tell you, I've shown it to many tourists that, oh, it even tells you where to walk. And so trying to reach those people electronically so they can do it themselves and say, oh, that's where I'm going. I would find interesting.
That's a great comment. Thank you. It is true. I think a lot of us know that Google Maps and other apps have these things in it, but as somebody in a city that doesn't use transit may not realize that that's available. So that's a really great bit of feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, just 20 miles south of the city, no. The other piece is I was very pleased to hear you say what I refer to as the words, those other impaired people. Quick story, my doctor, we always joke about the fact that he's been my doctor for 43 years, but he has a patient in his 80s that shows up every 3 weeks using the CTA He says, I have no idea how it gets here. And so clearly recognizing some of the things that aging population needs to have is significant in allowing that older person to still maintain a social structure in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did remember what I was gonna say. And it was really around, the lettering, the new, what is it called?
Lollipops.
The lollipops. And a lot of people have already commented some of the things I was thinking about regarding that, but when I first saw them, I was like, what is this? You know, and I use the system a lot and I was very confused. So I'm glad that it's a pilot that's being considered for expansion. I guess if there was some way to, I don't know, share via social media, like kind of like telling the story about what it is and why and how it would be helpful as you're expanding that would be helpful for us so that we're like not looking at these letters like what is going on. Because at first I was like, is this, I didn't think that it was like an actual connection to something else in the CTA realm. I thought it was like some other kind of like event-based thing. I really didn't know what it was, so.
No, that's fair. And no, I've had the same comment. I mean, you know, the nice thing about it is if you don't know what it is, it doesn't affect you. It's okay to just ignore. But yes, we've been actually talking about, you know, whether we should do a social thing. So I'll bring that back to the team. I also plan to do a little brochure that we'll put at stations as we add it, and extra user education for station staff to use that to help guide people.
Apologies, I just thought of something. I don't know if it's necessarily in your wheelhouse. I've been thinking about this for a while, and you were talking about signage and the like. I know in some of our member buildings, if you go down into the lobby, or I've even seen some cafes, like private businesses will have CTA info on like a dedicated screen or something.
Yeah,
How,
that's cool.
how can you do
Increase
that? Yeah. I think I know of private companies and that would love to take advantage of that. And I think it's really helpful. And I also think it's kind of like, it could help shake kind of the status quo of, oh, it's 5 o'clock. Let me get my Lyft. Let me go get my Uber, or let me go hail a cab. If they go down and in the lobby, it's like, oh, LaSalle is coming in 2 minutes.
Yeah, so we've done some outreach with different organizations over the years, and certainly I would love to see it in more like building elevators where they do that. Obviously, anybody with a custom kit can use our APIs to integrate times, but there's a little known thing that we did many years ago that is on my radar to just completely overhaul for modern screens and make it more responsive so it just fits on any screen, called our DIY transit display. And you can basically just plug in some routes and stops and it will come up with a slideshow to play on any computer screen.
That's cool.
That's transit stuff, just as a way of making it easy for people to do their own digital signage. And I think it's a really cool idea. Once we've gotten it updated, I'm certainly going to go to the people in the building that I live in and be like, can you? Okay. Please do. I want it when I'm in the lobby.
Love to learn more about.
Yeah.
The West Loop, transit is obviously a trickier connection than buildings in the loop.
Yeah.
And I think the newer ones there, they have them in the
Yeah.
displays, and I think it's kind of like a shiny, like cool thing where it's, you know.
Yeah, the current version is a little bit outdated. I do intend to update it, but it's at transitchicago.com/DIY display. I don't know where I'm going to be able to fit that in my large queue of things to get done, but it is on my mind. Well, with that, if there aren't any more questions, I will say thank you all for the feedback, and it was a pleasure sharing this information with all.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
And go Condors. You know, Chicago, we gotta represent what high school we came from. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so next on the agenda, I think, well, we're coming up on time. So Ms. Greenlee, should we try to get through as much as we can, or do we postpone to the next meeting?
The survey has been completed by 6 advisory board members. So I just reached out to the person in communications who's handling that. So it would be great if we could get the other 7 to fill it out.
Okay.
It's not very long, but that is instructive. That's definitely instructive as it relates to the mission statement and the committee piece.
Yes.
Right. So that's the feedback I can give you.
So I think it'll be great to get that additional data from this group, and then we can postpone till the next meeting. But in our time now, I guess I can give a little context as to how this even came to be. We all, recognize that we have some interests here. We have desires to be a better conduit for communications and information from our fellow citizens to the leadership here at CTA. And we want to make sure that we are, as a board, performing in a way that can actually be helpful to both, us as riders and those that are leading the activities here. And so we just wanted to get some more insights via this survey to help guide a conversation around what that looks like. What are we doing to be more supportive of the work here at CTA? And just define what that means, and clarify our roles here on this board. And so some of the ideas that came out of conversation between Rob and I and Ms. Greenlee were really just about what, should we consider subcommittees? Should we consider having more frequent meetings so that there's more time for us to actually do more business? Because a lot of our meetings have consisted of briefings, which have been wonderful. I love getting this information, but it doesn't leave time for us to have discussions and deliberate different ways that we can be a more effective board. And so that's what the purpose of the survey is, to really kind of get a sense of you all's thinking around those things. We're coming up on our first year, and then we have one more year after that. So what does that look like for us? And of course, you all know, with the Open Meetings Act, we're not able to, have these conversations without, making sure put it out with the public. So we wanted to make sure our time together was being spent more wisely, and that we could come to a consensus on, what that looks like moving forward. So please respond to the survey if you haven't already. If you have, thank you very much. And then we will reconvene. And then upon learning from the survey, we'll figure out if we need to meet, on a monthly basis, what that looks like, because that might be helpful if we see each other and are able to connect with each other more frequently. I also wanted to make sure that I know, Ryan, you reached out to me on LinkedIn. I'm horrible on LinkedIn. But I did send you my email address. I don't know if you saw that, but if you guys want to, connect individually, I'm happy to do that. Because I just want to hear from you guys, and I've not really gotten a sense directly from some of you on your thinking in terms of your role here. And I want to make sure that we just understand that and understand each other's desires as we all love the CTA and want to see it succeed. Yes.
We share all of our CTA email addresses.
Yes, I think the challenge, and we've been in discussion about the email addresses. I think that we can't communicate with each other. At least I haven't been able to. I've only been able to communicate with Ms. Green. I haven't been able to, like, it doesn't go anywhere when I try to send you guys.
You're with us all updating our passwords, I think you'll find it'll work fine.
It wasn't a password issue. It was just whatever the permissions settings are for our communication inside and outside of the CTA. It's limiting us to be able to email to certain people. I know from my email, when I was accessing it, I wasn't able to email of anyone other than Ms. Greenlee. So I don't know if that's changed because I know I need to update my password. So I will do that after this meeting. But when I did have access to it, I wasn't able to communicate with any of you. And I would prefer that we use CTA's email addresses just because this is, public business and we don't want to have FOIA in our personal email. So that would be ideal, but we just need to kind of like sort through like what is
Outlook, CTA's system in terms of your email, your official CTA email to communicate with each other? No. Have you tried?
Yeah, no, I think I can only send emails to Georgette. I think one of the challenges is that, I guess maybe aside from like permissions, one of the challenges that I run into is that I can't get my CTA email, like I can't get notifications like on my phone or whatever, because I have the Outlook app and that's like for my work email and I can't be signed up. Yeah, I can't be signed into both like my work email and my CTA email. If there was any way to get like a notification, like when I have like a new message coming in on my Citizens Advisory Board email, if there was any way to like notify me on like my personal email or like an app or like just any way for me to like know that because I don't really, in all honesty, like I don't really check that email regularly because I get a lot of the Citizens Advisory Board. It's sent to both my personal email and my CTA email. I don't get a lot of those notifications if it's sent to my system.
Our general counsel just left, although he sent a wonderful representative, Mr. Bora. This was a long conversation that the chief of staff, the general counsel and I had in terms of the email addresses. So I'll go back to the map on the email address.
Yeah.
And see if we can get some breathing room on that.
Do you have any, another item of discussion, or not discussion, but concern, do you have any updates on the transit card?
Yes. So, transit cards are being made. We'll pass out the little sample transit card. I don't know why it says ethic committee member on the top. We have all of your photos already, so they are now reproducing them, but I'll just pass. This is just a sample.
Oh, it's not the real card.
No, it's not the real card. They're making them. So then you'll look at it, pass it down. They should be, I would hope they would be ready next week. And that is something that's gonna be made. That also went around the Mulberry Bush.
Okay. You said they'll be available next week.
I believe so. One of them is available too. But
Okay.
So they have your pictures and they're right now, putting the pictures and the names and the title. And they'll get them,
Let me be signed into both my.
probably get them in a little thing.
Okay.
I would think.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for
Are welcome.
that.
I will say from the 6 responses we do have that it looks like the cadence of the meetings can be moved up. No one has, only a few people have said every month, but definitely like 6 times a year, which is every other month. It's kind of coming in pretty strong too.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't want to meet 6 times a year or more, you need to send your survey in.
Yes. We know.
'Cause that's where this train is headed. It's headed to more meetings.
Okay, so is there any additional new business that we should know about?
No, Chairperson Raby, there is no new business.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, may I have a motion for adjournment?
Aye.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved by Peter Henderson, seconded by Danielle Stanley, that the meeting be adjourned. We'll take a roll call vote. Scott Vanderwill,
Yeah.
Danielle Stanley, Caroline Pavlicek.
Yes.
Dr. Parnell,
Yes.
Ryan McCray,
Yes.
Aiden Keith,
Yes.
Bob Johnson,
Yes.
Tanya Raby.
Yes.
And Peter Henderson.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
And I